What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Grant Hughes. So much to get to today. It's going to be a dead sprint as we talk about the NBA Finals, some offseason slop, and then, of course, we're going to get to our Atlantic Division free agency offseason outlooks. Very, very, very quickly, though, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you get us. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, those help us the most. Leave reviews and ratings on Apple. That helps out a ton. Follow us on the socials at HardwoodKnocks on TikTok and Twitter, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast description. And if you're watching, go to our, well, even if you're not watching, go to our merch shop. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description. You can support the show by buying merch. Grant is sporting the I'm Mitchell Robinson, I'm sorry shirt that has Jared Allen crossed out. You could see it if you're watching. Look at that. That's just, you're ready for Fashion Week with that.
So go ready. There.
Go cop, pick up, whatever you want to call it. 1, 2, a dozen of those. And yes, we have loads to get to, but we do need to ask the most important question of the day. Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Dan. How are you?
I am annoyed because we just recorded something before this that I forgot to hit record on. We had to redo it. So I'm not a happy camper, but you soldiered through it because you're an awesome podcast host and friend. So I appreciate that.
Well, now, I mean, really, now everything we did was just better because we got 2 passes at it. So
that or it's worse.
Or worse. Hard to say.
Yeah. It really is hard to say. So I think we need to start with the most important thing is the Heat clearly just decided that they needed to turn Nikola Jokic into a scorer and they forced him to score. I'm trolling. You can't really convey that. I just found that was funny. That was the discussion afterwards. We are 2 games deep into the NBA Finals. They're tied up at 1. What is your biggest overarching thought about this? Or has anything you initially said leading in to the finals changed after your impressions of the series after watching the first 2 games?
I guess ultimately not a lot has changed because I picked the Nuggets in 6. So that by definition suggests I thought that the Heat would put up a fight, which they've definitely done. I think so overall, overarching, speaking in overarching terms, not a lot has changed, but I actually had the thought after game 1 that the Heat could have won that game. And there were some of the shot quality metrics out there that suggested maybe Miami was unlucky or, make or miss, blah, blah, blah. And then the Heat did have in game 2, everyone's talking about the defense, which is fair, but they did have that game where they made half their threes basically. And we're talking about this series ahead of time, figuring there's going to be one of those. If they get 2, or if they get 2 Jimmy Butler games, which they haven't gotten yet really, then we got a series. So the Heat maybe should have, probably more could have won game 1 and shot their way to a win in game 2. And the defense stuff, I take your point on like how it's become like a hack thing, or Eric Spoelstra bristles at the idea of turning Jokic into a scorer. But the fact is that the Heat did something defensively with that zone that worked pretty well. So whatever that means, that seems sustainable. You'd assume Denver will solve it a little bit. But the Heat have kind of done a lot of what, if you were picking them to be competitive, they would have to do so far. I don't think that should make them the favorites or anything close to that, but it's a series. I think it's a series. And we both kind of thought that, I think. I don't know if has anything changed in your estimation?
I just assumed it wasn't going to be, not that it wouldn't be much of a series. I picked Nuggets in 5 as I'm stumbling through that. And I guess underestimated the Heat once again, to their ability to just figure things out. And the defense has been fine. I respect what they were doing a lot in game 2 where it's, hey, let's play Nikola Jokic straight up with Bam Adebayo. And you sent some help, but I can't even remember. Was it like the first quarter or second quarter? Eric Spoelstra was mad that they sent a double at Jokic. And I do think that can help take away some other stuff, or at least make it tougher on him as he's getting closer to the basket if you're going to send late help. So I've respected that, but the Nuggets have scored in this series, even as the Heat have done whatever. It's what it comes down to me. I guess 2 things that stand out is I know Jamal Murray was a big reason towards the end of that game why the Nuggets almost won in game 2. You need him to shoot better from 3. Michael Porter Jr., those 2 combined, I think are 8 of 32 through their first 2 games. And so you're going to need that shot making to be better. And you're going to need to be better defensively because the Heat's offense, specifically in game 2, everyone's talked to death about how they lost Max Strus early on in those possessions where he hit, what was it, 4 threes in the first
Yeah.
quarter or whatever it was. And on like 2 or 3 of those, they were just like egregious misses. A lot of that fell on Michael Porter Jr. And he has not looked great in this series. And we've, touted how good like he's been throughout these playoffs and critical. And so if he's not even going to be, he's not making shots, not being great defensively, that's going to be an issue. I think I respect and I wouldn't have thought, we talked about leading into the series, would this be a Kevin Love series? I thought it was smart that the Heat went to Kevin Love in the starting lineup. And like, he didn't even shoot, what was he, like 2 of 9 or whatever it was from the floor?
But it mattered.
The fact that you have to guard him on offense. Whereas if it's Cody Zeller or, they were kind of treating Caleb Martin weird. And apparently he's been dealing with migraines. So I don't know if that accounts for sort of his lackluster offensive performances. You really have to give the Heat a ton of credit for the different buttons they pushed. I don't want to oversimplify this, but it's just like, if they're not going to shoot 48+% from 3, I don't know that this is necessarily a series, but the caveat there is, because again, I was clearly wrong. Like this series seems destined to go, like if the Nuggets rattle off 3 straight victories now, I'd be not shocked, but it'd be fairly surprising after seeing how well the Heat have played in both fourth quarters. And like Michael Malone being frustrated that they took their foot off the gas. I totally understand that. And so there's a lot of like different things to sort of harp on, but I think I came away from this more impressed with Miami's offense, and then maybe a little bit more concerned about Denver's defense than like really anything else. There was just, to me, it felt like there was, and I'm not saying Jokic can do no wrong. It's just, to me, there's been too much focus on like, look at what they've been able to do to Jokic. It's just like, he dropped 40. Like it's just,
right.
You could say like you would prefer him to only have 4 assists, but like how many assists does he have if his teammates are making shots? And so like, yeah, I guess credit the Heat for making life difficult on him, but I really think the bigger focus needs to be, okay, well, what can Denver do defensively? And just look at what Miami was able to do offensively in game 2.
I think if I'm concerned, I'm not really, so like I said, I'm not really adjusting any of my priors big picture for the series, but if I'm the Nuggets, I'm a little concerned that the zone works like at all, that Miami zone works at all, because in theory, if you just get Jokic in the middle of the floor with some space, which you can do against most zones, and this one in particular, then like that, the Nuggets win that possession because he'll just make the right decision or score. But the Heat have done so well just denying him touches like in the middle of that zone that it's surprisingly well. So if I'm the Nuggets, I'm not shook, but I'm a little concerned that, oh man, it would have been nice if, as expected, like we would have just destroyed any zone look that Miami threw at us. And that just wasn't the case. But yeah, so, I mean, if the Heat have another hot shooting game, which is totally possible because they've just been continuing to do it, I might get a little concerned. But yeah, nothing crazy yet. It's been a great series. Game 2 was like a ton of fun to watch.
Yeah, it was. It did seem like, though, so at the beginning, the Nuggets come out, or the Heat come out like super hot. And then it was, oh, is there something here? But then the Nuggets they led by as many as 15. Yeah. And you kind of thought it was going to go off the rails for Miami there. And I started in my head, I was like, there were people I saw pick the Nuggets in 4. And I'm thinking, oh, they must be doing like a mild victory lap at this point. For the Heat to come, and I even called their game 1 comeback. It was like a fake comeback, it felt like.
Kinda,
they were just sort of hanging around. And like, even it just seemed like so many red flags. Jimmy Butler was definitely more aggressive, but like the Heat took, I think it was 3 or 4 shots at the rim in the first half of game 2. And
just like no free throws all game 1 too, right? That was right. The story there.
2 of them, a whopping 2 of them. And they're not a super rim heavy team to begin with, but like even by their standards, it's like so rim light. And so I don't know, I shouldn't be impressed by the Heat at this point. Like it's real, like they're a good team. This is not, everyone could go through how many undrafted guys that they have on their roster, like we do every single broadcast, yada, yada, yada. But like, yeah, there's going to be, and by the way, I found this split weird, which is something to keep in mind. The Heat are shooting 41% per cleaning the glass on threes when they're on the road. They're 35.9% at home. That's weird, right? That's weird. But I'm just like, even so, Max Strus comes out hot, but then even like with Duncan Robinson, and we've talked about him a lot during these playoffs, him coming in and like the threat of his shooting, but now he's just a reliable decision maker off the dribble. I think Bam has been big where he didn't need to be as aggressive because Miami shooters were hitting shots. You didn't need to be as aggressive from the in-between range. He's been fantastic this series. And like that's been huge. He's still been able to hit those in-between looks that the Nuggets are going to concede to him. And I think you look at this, you said before we entered this series, and my prediction hasn't changed. I might go to Nuggets in 6. I still think that the Nuggets are going to win the title.
Yeah.
That hasn't, I want to make that clear. That hasn't changed for me one bit. But you said coming into the series, the Heat will get one game because Jimmy Butler will be the best player on the floor. He is yet to be the best. I would say even close to the best.
Not even close. Yeah.
Like his playmaking in game 2 for sure. That was like awesome. And they have one game. And so that's what I keep coming. You said that. And I've been thinking about it ever since towards the end of game 1, I'm like, oh, but then watching game 2 and how it unfolded toward the end, I'm going, wow, I wonder if I come away more concerned than like, should the Nuggets be ultra concerned? And I default towards no, but I do think it's notable that you've gotten a victory on the road without Jimmy Butler being, I think you could don't even say the best player on the floor, your best player. On the floor.
Right. I think my last thought on really the Heat is that I feel like some part of me and probably everybody has sort of been waiting for like when, whether it's the hot shooting, whether it's like Martin and Strus and Vincent just playing, way over their heads compared to the regular season, like just kind of waiting for the Heat to turn back into a pumpkin. Like, you snap your fingers and then suddenly they're back to the team that got outscored during the year and couldn't shoot and all this other stuff. I think it's clear now that that's not the way this will go. I think if and when the Nuggets win the series, it will be because the Nuggets are really good and they have the best player, but also just because the Heat, even playing at, this elevated level, like aren't quite good enough. I think that's the way it will go, as opposed to, after the Milwaukee series, it was like, oh, that kind of felt fluky. And then, okay, they made it to the conference finals. Now it's like, it felt like, the wheels would come off or they'd revert to their true form, quote unquote. I don't think that's it. I think it's just going to be the Heat can do this. They can win games by making half their threes. They've done it all playoffs. Jimmy Butler's going to get you one, but ultimately the Nuggets are just better. But so like, to anybody assuming that the Heat will flip the switch the wrong way at some point and just be who they were, that's off the table at this point. That isn't going to happen. A fluke is not a fluke if it persists for like 2 months.
Yeah, we have to stop framing it. I mean, we even had a segment where it's just like, we're not even going to try and explain the Heat. And now, I don't want to, because part of it's just like, this is an incredible run that they're on, but they're just absolutely so good. And even just right down to, we've talked a lot about whether you look at how the supporting cast, is it depth in the form of optionality or depth in the form of uncertainty? Because like you have to toggle all these different buttons and you don't necessarily know, okay, we have Bam, we have Jimmy, but like what's kind of happening after that? We know what everyone can do, but there are going to be spurts where Max Strus isn't going to go 0 of 80 from 3, but there might be nights where he isn't shooting too well. And now Caleb Martin, who was one of the finalists for the conference finals MVP, is now again dealing with migraines, has not been a huge factor offensively in this series. You have Haywood Highsmith, plays a bunch of minutes in, game 1, and I guess the game got out of hand at that point, but then barely plays in game 2. Yeah. We kind of saw that towards the end of the conference finals where it's, Haywood Highsmith every other game. They could just go to Kevin Love. I had written after game 1 that they needed to get away from trying to steal minutes with Cody Zeller against Jokic, and they came right back and tried to steal minutes with Cody Zeller against Jokic. We'll see if those still stick in game 3. But I've come away from this just endlessly impressed with Miami after already being endlessly impressed with them. And are you watching for, as we wrap up the finals talk here, what are you watching for specifically in game 3, or what are you thinking about most heading into game 3, like a change you could see or something that you're going to be monitoring?
I think a couple things. One, I'm curious what kind of shots the Heat are going to get, because now sort of like it's all been laid bare that the Nuggets have decided that they didn't play hard enough and didn't bring the requisite intensity, and that contributed to Miami getting some pretty good looks, like you mentioned the Strus looks in the first quarter of game 2. Does that tighten up? And then if and when that does, is that just the end of it? Because if the Heat don't keep pace, I think the Nuggets will continue to score, and that's how that game will go and how the series will go. And then I'm still obsessed with the zone. I'm blown away that it's been remotely effective, because I just did not think that was a real option. And I just wonder how much more Miami will use it, what changes they'll make. Will they keep pressing? That's the other thing. before dropping into the zone, they've put on a bunch of full and 3/4 court pressure, and the Nuggets are getting into their stuff with 12 seconds left on the shot clock, that matters. Can the Heat keep doing that kind of stuff? That's the other thing I'll keep watching, because I think the Nuggets, all things being equal, will just find ways to score most likely, and we agree they're the better team. But if Miami can keep making some of this stuff work, then maybe that changes.
And as you mentioned, Denver had a 125.6 offensive rating in game 2. And so you could talk about Miami, but it's they still figured out ways to score. I think what I'm going to be watching is whether this and the Miami's point differential during the playoffs is skewed very heavily toward look what we do in the fourth quarter. But are they going to keep this stuff up in the fourth quarter? This was from John Schumann of NBA.com. I actually didn't check it, but he had them at a 189.5 offensive rating.
Oh yeah. It's the highest of any quarter all season, basically.
Right. It was in the top 10 or something like that, which is just 189.5 is monstrous. And so you can definitely need to criticize what the Nuggets were doing defensively, as Michael Malone did. And it felt like they just took their foot. I hate framing it like that, but it felt like they kind of let up. It wasn't Mark Jackson level of
too.
Some teams don't know how to handle success. Did you hear that on the broadcast?
Yeah, I hate that framing too, because it feels dismissive and an oversimplification. And it usually, we weren't trying hard enough, is it's symptomatic of something way worse. We've tuned the coach out, or we hate each other, or things like that. That's not the case with Denver, but it always gives me pause when that is the agreed upon explanation of we didn't bring it. It's what do we really that's not a thing. I don't know. Anyway.
You made Jeff Green mad, though. He was it's the mad. Fucking finals. And
he said an F word.
The other thing that we haven't talked enough about, and they kind of fell off too, Christian Brown has a great game for most of the game. And I've been very impressed with the benches, the lineups where we're skewing, okay, it's only Jamal Murray on the court, or it's only MPJ, but mostly just Jamal Murray. And then we're going to just surround him with defense. And some of the bench lineups that they've been able to roll out defensively for Denver have really been tone setters, and they didn't maintain it for all of game 2. But this is a team that I think I trust to just be hey, is this sort of a wake up call, or is this just looking at their performance over the course of the season, over the course of the entire playoffs, to score as efficiently as they have, despite not getting great games, or even forget Michael Porter Jr. has not been great, but you haven't even gotten full games from Aaron Gordon's hot in game 1, kind of fades. Jamal Murray up and down as per usual. They haven't put together a complete performance yet, and they're going to. That's just the level of faith I have in them. And so I do expect this series will last longer than 5 games now, though, which is exciting from just being able to watch it. But I don't think it's changed my impression overall. I was already very impressed with Miami. I think they're eventually going to run out of offensive firepower specifically to hang with this Nuggets team.
I think that's a great point to go out on. We've spent all this time talking about what does it look like, for Miami to win? Well, this has to happen in one game and this has to happen in another. We haven't talked about Denver's just going to play a perfect game or two at some point. That's just because they're just better. So that's a good way to go out, is by sort of focusing on Denver just has the capacity to make this not a series if they kind of get everything right.
Do you want to talk about, do you have any stray thoughts on, I went into the Monty Williams hire for Detroit, but that was without you. Any thoughts on, the Pistons' decision to give him the $13+ million a year?
I feel like he's the right coach for that team where they are in their developmental arc. It makes me a little concerned that he basically said no first, right? And then they said, how about some extra money? And then he said yes. Is that a fair assessment of the sequence of events, more or less?
We were on here saying, he clearly doesn't want to coach next year. We said that, and then 2 days later he was hired. So I'm in full agreement with you. And
so, because I'm sure you talked about it, they're paying him a ridiculous amount of money over a very long-term contract for an NBA head coach. And so if that was the reason, I get it. It's a job. You go where they're going to pay you a ton of money, and in any other line of work, you would never question it. But if he didn't want to, and then the money swayed him, how in is he? That would be a concern I have. But he is the right coach. I think he's the pick I would have made. If you could, anyone out there on the market to coach the Pistons, he's it, I think, because he has, he's well respected. He is a guy that I think young and old players and believe in, generally speaking, just because he's played and he's had success everywhere, most places he's been. He has some gravitas, like, and the Suns were really, really good when he was in charge of them. So, yeah, I mean, whether you're Cade Cunningham or whether you're like Bojan Bogdanovic, I think he makes a lot of sense for this team. As long as it's not just the money that made him choose it.
I do think though that hopefully this implies, I think the commitment feels like it infers they're really looking to make a splash immediately, but the length of the contract is kind of like, okay, well, he's going to be given the runway to figure this out. And this is not going to be something that's rushed. But I do think maybe the draft, but more so how they use their cap space in free agency might say a lot about what their expectations are for this season, and maybe how available is Bogdanovic in trade rumors. He opens things up. I'm not saying you need to move him, but I still want to just make sure that this team is in it for the longer haul rather than, okay, we've been in this rebuild for a few years now and it's time to, progress needs to come in the form of wins in the standings rather than just these moral or functional developmental victories.
There's a lot of teams this offseason that feels like are kind of ready to start skipping some steps. Like the Rockets are kind of the prime example of that, talking about we're going to make, veteran acquisitions and we're going to try to win. It seems like Detroit has kind of been trying to do that for a couple years, like with some of their veteran signings. What do you think about their like 1 foot in, 1 foot out approach? Like, because I just default to just take your time. Let's see what Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey look like. Let's figure out which big guys we want to keep. And let's not try to win 38 games, this year.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would classify it as 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but it does seem like they have one eye on like the plan at all times.
Right.
And I don't want to see them indulge that. And I do think and he did play well once he got there. I wasn't thrilled with the James Wiseman move, but that's not a move that you make thinking, okay, like we're gonna compete next
Good
season.
point.
As you mentioned, you're trying to figure things out on the front line with your trillion bigs. And so that I'm not saying that they're gonna rush into this. I just do feel like you could view this a number of different ways where it's, well, are you really just spending that much on the coach to be like, hey, like for the first 2 or 3 years, like we're just gonna be figuring things out. And so and again, the Bogdanovic, like getting him in the first place, I just have my eye on them to where it's okay. We know the Rockets, and they have an incentive because of the picks that they owe to Brooklyn, Oklahoma City. But like the Pistons are just sort of like the next up where it's always, what's the next most likely? Well, Portland and Houston are up there of teams that probably shouldn't trade their lottery picks, but are going to anyway. And then I kind of have my eye on like the Pistons after that. But I don't think they'll trade their lottery picks, just sort of in that bucket of, will they try and accelerate things too quickly? The other coaching hire, which we did not talk about, and I didn't talk about either, Frank Vogel to Phoenix. Kevin Young, who was a finalist for the job, he is staying on as the highest paid assistant in the league now, over $2 million per. Doc Rivers pulled his name out. Apparently, and this leaves no doubt in my mind that Nick Nurse was never going to get the Bucks job. That we're just doing. So anyone who said I was wrong, you were right. I was 100% wrong when I said, "Oh, Nurse pulled out. Maybe he knew he wanted the Sixers." No, we're just doing the thing where if it looks like a coach is, he decided not to be right anymore.
You can't fire me. I quit.
Before I throw it to you, I just want to say Frank Vogel is a great defensive coach, and I think that for what Kevin Young is known for offensively and his relationship with Devin Booker, that could be a good partnership. My two very quick thoughts that I want to throw to you. One, to get rid of Monty Williams and then for it to kind of come down to Kevin Young, Frank Vogel, and Doc Rivers, it felt uninspiring. And then my second thought is, while Kevin Young, I was about to say Ty Lue, while Kevin Young and Ty Lue could work, while Kevin Young and Frank Vogel could work, there's something inherently awkward about missing out on a job, staying on to be the top assistant at the highest paid salary in the league. I'm assuming Vogel was at least okay with it, or was just told that, hey, Kevin Young if he's staying, is going to come with this job. I don't know if it threatens to undermine him, but knowing that Kevin Young has like Devin Booker in his camp, it just has the potential it could work. And I know Suns fans are excited. That's fine. I'm not going to say that you shouldn't, but it's just a little awkward.
That's the correct take. I think you can't, you said Ty Lue, you can't talk about this situation without talking about David Blatt and Ty Lue in Cleveland, where he was the highest paid assistant there. The team and LeBron soured on David Blatt, and Ty Lue was, oh, look at me. Hey, well, let's just move this guy over in a chair on the bench. And there you go. I think that's very, like, if it goes bad with Vogel in Phoenix and so guess what? Kevin Young is the next head coach. It's like, well, yeah, of course that's what happened. We'll be able to look back, and say this was obvious and you could see this coming. I do think Vogel is a good coach that deserved another chance, and like his defensive track record, just it's kind of unimpeachable. Like wherever he is, good defense shows up, and it's just happened too often for it to be a coincidence. I don't know that he has the ability to add like 4 rotation players to the roster, which is really what the Suns need. But I think that's a totally fine pick, even if I would agree that going from Williams to him is kind of, and factoring in who else it could work. It could work, but uninspired, I think I would agree with. It's you kind of shuffled the deck chairs a little bit. But if the case was that this team was just done listening to Monty Williams, which seems like, and the best players were chief among them, then like, yeah, what else are you going to do?
The final thing here is some people have wondered whether this makes it less likely the Suns trade Ayton because of like how Frank Vogel likes to use his bigs and have rim protecting bigs. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what you think about that.
I think it does make it less likely that they trade him. It doesn't change the fact that they need depth, and trading Ayton is like a great way, maybe the best way for them to actually accomplish that. But I think I have to think that some element of the decision to swap out Williams for Vogel is maybe we get DeAndre Ayton like back, like all the way back in. And he was a starting center for a finalist and a team that won 60 whatever games. So that's something that's not like an insignificant factor in the decision making process there.
That's a great way to look at it. I still default to, if they keep him, it says more about his trade market than what they think he can do under Frank Vogel. Is kind of just where I'm at with 3 years and $100+ million on a big. The last thing before we get to our Atlantic Division offseason preview, there was a rumor, I don't know if you saw it, or a report from Shams Charania of The Athletic and Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report that Kyrie wants LeBron in Dallas. Just thoughts on that, thoughts on the reporting and the details of it all. I hand the talking stick to you. We both didn't want to cover it, but I said we could skip it, and you said you think it needs to be covered. So.
Well, I do, and I'm trying to channel our off-air discussion about it to like get riled up a little bit about it. So like, okay, Kyrie would like LeBron in Dallas. Like, got it. So how are we doing that? And is it the way where LeBron gives up $97 million? Is it the way where Dallas tries to concoct a trade with nowhere near the assets it would take to get LeBron? Is it by LeBron, deciding he no longer cares about playing, being around USC where his son's going to play, being in LA with like, I guess it could happen. I just don't see any feasible way for it to, like, we just shouldn't believe that this is possible or probable. And I'm annoyed that we're talking about it when we're in the middle of the finals, especially coming on the heels of like a 48-hour, maybe longer than that, news cycle of LeBron. Is he going to retire or not? When again, yeah, he's going to leave $100 million on the table to walk. Like, we talked about that a lot, just how like, it was probably you asked the guy who ran a bunch of marathons if he would like to run again. And that was part of it. But now it's just like, I know it's a transactionally based news cycle now, and everybody cares about this stuff more than the games, but like, can we just watch the finals? Can we watch 2 really good teams in an interesting matchup and not talk about just like, this is like a 2K made up like this. I'll throw it to you because I'm like starting to trip myself up, but like LeBron to Dallas feels beyond pipe dreamy. Like, it's just, the mechanics of it are so ridiculous. Like, it's not literally impossible, but it's close enough to where we shouldn't even be like honoring this report leaked by, I guess, Kyrie's camp, that he would like LeBron to that. Like, that's just like, what is this,
Yeah, my thoughts. So I saw this corrected real quick. It's just like, when you're giving a platform to either these teams or these players or these agents, like, you don't to frame it as the Mavs were trying to make a run at LeBron last season when LeBron couldn't be traded. Right. Nobody looks good there. Is that are the Mavs trying to like showcase how little they know about extensions and the collective bargaining agreement if it was them? And even talking about, the easiest way to get there is a buyout. just sort of run me the wrong way because you mentioned he's going to leave how much money on the table, or the Lakers are going to have this huge dead cap hit. And the other thing to remember here is he would the easiest way for it to happen, by the way, is via trade. It's not via buyout, it's via trade.
Mm-hmm.
And the two things that really get in the way of that is LeBron has to say, I'm going to Dallas and you can't send me anywhere else, because Dallas
I'm going to retire, trade me.
Right. And which, okay, fair, because Dallas's best offer is salary filler plus Josh Green, Jaden Hardy, and they can give up to 2 first-round picks, including the number 10 pick in this year's draft. If you put LeBron on the open market, like to trade him anywhere, which they theoretically could do, I still believe you're getting more.
Way more.
That. Right. Well, I did see there were people, Mavericks Twitter was like, why would we give up the number 10 pick for like,
stop.
So, and the other thing is, so if you max out Kyrie and then you trade for LeBron's salary and you have Luka Doncic's salary, that is literally the salary cap next year, $134 million.
Yeah.
How are you fleshing out the rest of the roster as these, like, you're going to lose your mid-level at that point, or I guess like you would have one more season of maybe being able to use it, but you're going to flesh out the roster with 8 minimums and then an exception. I mean, and there could be players left after whatever trade. So it seems highly unrealistic. And I still, if they're going to team up, I think it happens in LA because, and I don't think it happens, to be clear.
And I don't think it should. I don't think that makes sense for the Lakers.
No, because I do think they need depth still. Mm-hmm. And the other thing here is like Kyrie, by the way, the only way that it really anything like this happens would be someone's taking a pay cut. And it would most likely be Kyrie, because guess what? He's the actual free agent. It's great that Kyrie's asking LeBron to come to Dallas. Kyrie is the free agent.
Yeah.
And so this feels more like maybe pressure could have even come from like the LeBron side of things at like, oh, let's put pressure on the Lakers to continue going after Kyrie, or Kyrie putting pressure on the Lakers. Hey, you need to give me a real offer. The Lakers can't max out Kyrie because you get into the issue of they can get between $30 and $35 million in cap space. I think it's under 35, but let's say they get to the $30 million number. That's just getting rid of basically everybody. You can't max. That's Kyrie's max is 46.9. And even if you do a sign and trade, you're looking at, okay, we're going to tack on Kyrie's 46.9 if you wanted to max him, to LeBron's 46.7, to Davis is 40.6. That again is the salary cap.
Yeah.
And now you're going to be hard capped. How are you working within that to build a competitive roster? Joe says in the chat, look how that worked out for the Suns this year. I mean, they clearly needed depth by the end of the season. I don't know if they would regret the Kevin Durant trade, though. This feels a little bit, the machinations are just different here. And I don't know. I don't see it happening, but if it does happen, it's overwhelmingly likely to happen in LA, because like Kyrie's the free agent, and if it's going to end with someone probably taking a pay cut anyway, I just don't think he's going to take the pay cut.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm the Lakers, give me the roster that had the second best record in the league after the All-Star break, which you could just have by bringing all your guys back, over Kyrie Irving and like nobody else depth wise on the whole roster. That's how simple it is for me.
Are you ready to move into the Atlantic Division offseason preview?
I am. You may have to keep us on a timer here so we don't spend 40 minutes on the first team.
Yeah, I won't. I will make us move things along. Don't everybody worry. So we begin with we can alternate going through the offseason vitals, but I actually need to scroll up to the offseason vitals. So we'll talk about these numbers, but the cap next year is projected to come in at $134 million, the luxury tax $162 million, the tax apron $169 million, which would make the second apron $179.5 million, 17.5 over the tax threshold. We'll talk about teams, whether they're going to have the bigger MLE or the mini MLE or what their best spending tool is. I'll begin with the Boston Celtics. Key free agents, Grant Williams, he's restricted, and Gallo has a player option. He'll pick it up. Key extension eligible candidates, Jaylen Brown, he's eligible for that supermax of 5 years and $290.3 million. Their best spending tool, maybe it's the mini mid-level, but they could be up against the second apron if they keep Grant Williams. So Grant, what are you thinking about? Like, what's your biggest overarching thought about the Celtics, their biggest need, what you're looking to see them do as we head into their offseason?
Yeah, we've talked about them a fair amount in the context of the postseason. And it seems to me that they need someone that can kind of shake things up or create a good shot, whether that's by driving or passing when the offense just stalls, which is like what got the Celtics killed again. You could also find another big maybe if especially, so I guess we could just get into like if you lose Grant Williams in restricted free agency, totally possible. You might need another big to throw in there, especially as Al Horford ages. But I don't view that as significant as big of a need as just someone to make a play offensively to like get a shot, which is a weird thing to say with Jason Tatum on the roster, but that's just what we saw was a failing in whether it's the offensive scheme or the personnel. So like you said it, if you, yeah, right. As Blown says, that was supposed to be Malcolm Brogdon. Turns out Malcolm Brogdon is pretty tunnel visiony and is a good spot up threat.
There have been someone in Discord, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who, said that they already have enough creators and they just have a bunch of, to me, it's just secondaries. Like they don't have the primary floor organizer. I think that's where the issue comes in.
And the bad news is, given the tools they're going to have, it'll be really hard, if not impossible, to find someone like that. And we should say there's not a lot of like high-end shot creators on the market to begin with. So like, let's start with, do you have an upper limit on Grant Williams that you're willing to match in restricted free agency? It feels like 16, 17 million is about as high as I'd be willing to go.
But it's just like, are they going to use him? Joe Mazzulla seemed very anti-Grant Williams at points throughout the season and the playoffs.
That was a point of like some frustration among the roster, is because
that was a
Mazzulla skewed offense.
That was a great piece of The Athletic, by the way, with
Jared Weiss and I forget Jay King.
Yeah. So I would probably go 15, 16 feels right.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely, if he gets 20 from anyone, like he wanted to at the beginning of the season, he doesn't give you enough. He's not big enough to give you the raw rim protection and a ton of rebounding and play the 5 by himself. So, but I would go what else are you going to do? Because you mentioned the advantage creation. The other thing I'm kind of thinking about for them is, do they need a big? Because Al Horford, what if the aging curve just kind of falls off?
Yeah,
it could. He's getting older. Yeah. And then you have Robert Williams III. How many games is he good for? And he was dealing with a sickness. I thought they were becoming like anti-RW3 towards the end of that Heat series, but he was apparently dealing with a sickness. And then if you're going to lose Grant Williams, and even if you don't lose Grant Williams, like you still kind of feel like you need a big that you actually trust to play, where it's okay. Blake Griffin seems like he might've had a good impact on the locker room, but it's not going to be him. And, Luke Cornett wasn't playing when it mattered. So do they need another big here? And that, to be fair, if they need another big, it definitely gets harder if you're losing Grant Williams in the process, but it's easier to find a big using minimums than it's, hey, can you just find like this other floor general? And all we have is the minimum or the mini MLE to offer.
Yeah. Can I throw you some like shot creator types that I was thinking of as potential targets?
I can't promise that I'll catch them, but please throw them at
me. So they're all bad. I don't feel good about any of them. So, I mean, just thinking of like someone that will shoot it, when it's reasonably open and the offense has gone to shit, like Lonnie Walker, Terrence Davis. I mean, if you're talking minimums, I don't think that's enough to get either of those guys. Right. Trey Jones is a very different type of player, may not get out of San Antonio at all, but he'll be the floor general type. Like, I just don't know if he's quite, up to that in task. Like he's kind of I don't know, like a stopgap really. I guess if you went big, is Naz Reid, is the mid-level enough to get Naz Reid? Like he's getting more than that, right?
If Naz Reid signs for the mid-level exception, he needs to fire his agent.
So that's all I got. Like, I think really, we've talked about this before with respect to, do you give Jaylen Brown $290 million? I think the best course for the Celtics is pretty much run it back. And just hope you get lucky on one of these minimum signings.
Add Frank Ntilikina, call it a day.
Sure, you're good. Noted shot creator Frank Ntilikina.
I've tried to figure out other, like, do you take a flyer on Derrick Rose as the team option, or Goran Dragic, like skew old that way? Or like, can you reinvent, like, is it time for a DJ Augustine renaissance or something in the NBA?
How many renaissances have we had for DJ Augustine?
Yeah, I don't. And so what you run into the issue of, if they want the player we're talking about, it probably needs to happen. And Blown says in the chat, I feel like they need a consistent shooter. Yes, I just feel like, I guess they could, but like, you have enough shooting on this roster. There's just variability because they take so many threes. There are going to be nights where it looks awful.
They got to generate different kinds of threes where it's like in to out instead of just swinging it around the perimeter.
Glad that someone appreciated my DJ Augustine. And it's when you're getting into trades, if you don't want to trade Brown and Tatum, which I wouldn't, we're both in the camp. It's just, you're not trading these guys. So then it's okay. Well, is RW3 and Smart and Brogdon and White on the table? I just don't even know like what the best player you could acquire while not trading any of your real core pieces. Like what this team could really use, and his team needs him now. So it's not gonna like Mike Conley in Boston would make it that type of a player where it doesn't have to be domineering floor general, but I think that's what they need. Do you think they need that more than they need another big? And we'll wrap it up there.
I think it's recency bias, although I don't know if you can call it that if it's been a couple of years. I want someone, and maybe I don't know if it's a player that's going to fix this. It may be a system thing. I just want someone that's going to make it so the offense doesn't look like five guys have just never played together before in like crucial playoff moments. So I think I focus more on someone that can pierce the defense, create shots, or, just conventionally generate offense that isn't swinging the ball around the perimeter with no like intention to do anything.
My final thing before I dismount the soapbox is that people have become way too low on the Celtics. They just made back-to-back conference finals, and it's just like, let's slow our roll here. Do you want to take us to the next team, or do you not have the sheet open? I
got it open. So alphabetically, because we're very good at the alphabet on this podcast, we've never messed it up. The Brooklyn Nets come next in the Atlantic Division. Very interesting team. Blew up the roster at the deadline last year. So they have key free agents. Cam Johnson is restricted. Probably going to be one of the most sought after free agents. Fits pretty much everywhere. I know what I think he deserves. I'm curious where you land on that. We can get to that in a little bit.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to get to that. That's going to be fascinated now.
Slightly less significant. Yuta Watanabe, good defensive player. The Nets have his non-bird rights. Can probably keep him if they want to. I don't imagine there's a huge outside offer coming for him. They don't have any major extension eligible candidates. Their cap picture, sort of their spending tools, essentially, like they have the mini mid-level, which is kind of contingent on how much Cam Johnson gets, and could get to the full MLE, which we have. I don't know if we mentioned mini mid-level is looking like it'll be about $7 million a year with standard raises. I can never remember the percentages of those raises. The full mid-level starts at 12.2. That's the projection. So they have a trade exception, a little under $5 million from the Kyrie Irving deal. They don't have to use that till February of 2024. And their biggest needs, I don't know if you want to kind of jump into that a little bit, but they also kind of need someone that is an upgrade on, say, Spencer Dinwiddie or the where did this come from version of Mikal Bridges, who's an offensive self-starter. And they could use a big. If you saw that series against the Sixers, it was like a joke what they were trying to do. And they did with, again, I will maintain the Nets did pretty well throwing a bunch of big wings at Embiid and doubling and stuff. Defensively, they have the potential to be awesome. They just need someone behind Nick Claxton with some size, I think. So where would you like to take it from there? Do you want to go targets? Do you want to talk Cam Johnson? What do you want to do with the Nets?
I want to hear your thoughts on how much you think that Cam Johnson deserves in free agency.
I just think the floor is like 4 years, $100 million. I think if he gets less than that, I'm surprised.
Wow.
And that's based on there are not a lot of combo forwards that are in the mid. He's an older rookie, so he's like 27 now. So you're getting basically his prime, like his mid to late 20s into his early 30, like age 31 season, maybe 30. He's a better defender than he was billed as coming out of college. He has proved that, like, I forget the stat that I had, but his defensive estimated plus minus, not a perfect stat, but I think we generally agree this is the best of the catch-alls. He's in like the 96th percentile in defensive estimated plus minus for his position last year. So like, he's not a spot shooter that has a low ceiling like he was supposedly. I keep harping on the draft status, but this was like the Suns got killed for reaching for him. I don't know if you remember all that. Narrative.
Yeah,
so,
no, I remember. Kobe White was shocked. Do you remember his interview? Where
I think he fits everywhere. I think the market should be huge because you have all these rebuilders that could totally justify spending big on him. Like, this guy's going to start for us for the duration of the deal we sign him to. Contender should want it. Like, the market should be, he should be as in demand on the market as, like, certainly more so than someone like Grant Williams or Kobe White, another restricted free agent you mentioned. I just think you got to start him at like 25 a year. I think that's just what the market's going to bear.
I will be fairly surprised if he gets that much. I guess I don't view my trouble with him. He's a very good player, and there's more of a floor game to him on offense than just shooting. Is he a combo forward?
He might just be a 4. He might just be a 4.
That's what I keep coming back to. Like, no, he's not as he would skew more towards the perimeter where it's like John Collins is 4-5. He's more 3-4. Can you give that much money to a very much one position player where it's like it's not like just point guard. And that just makes it so harder to, like use him in maybe certain defensive lineups. Perhaps it doesn't matter. And he's a better defender than I think he's credited with. But if you start trying to put him on like true wings, I don't know if he's going to hold up all that well. And so that would be, I think that plus you kind of look at the teams that have cap space. I'm not sure how many of them will throw that much money out there. And maybe they're signing trades I haven't considered yet. But I think that represses his value more than anything, is that I view him very much as sort of a pure 4.
I'm not sure on that point, but I do think he's different. Like you mentioned, John Collins, he's like a different type of player than John Collins because he is just a lights out, you cannot lose him shooter. So if you can do that and credibly defend a position, I think that's not the same as being we're not talking, I'm trying to think of like who is the quintessential, like I guess Anunoby, if Anunoby were a slightly better shooter, like that's the upgraded version of this. Johnson's kind of skews more offense, I guess. But I think that, so you mentioned some of the teams like Charlotte could do it. Detroit could do it. Houston could do it. Indy could do it. The Thunder could pay him. Even Orlando's like the last team, someone like him, but like they could do, Sacramento could maybe trim a ton and get enough money. The Spurs, like there's all these teams, Utah, like there's all these teams that could really throw a bunch of money at Cam Johnson. So I just feel like the offer sheet's coming. The big offer sheet's coming, and the Nets should probably match it.
Blown says Ben Simmons could fix all their entire problems. That's fucked up. That's fucked up. When we look at their need for size or advantage creation, and you had noted here that they might be the best team in the division to pull off a big trade, I think I would agree with you. The only team that would rival that is maybe because the Raptors may be bigger as sellers, but not as buyers.
And the Knicks too. That's why I have a question mark in there in the doc. Like
that would be the only team. But when you're looking at free agency, I mean, like if Dame becomes available, if Trae Young becomes available, I don't think those guys will become available. And so when you move on from there, it gets a little tougher. You're not going to solve. We just went through like what the point guard market is going to be. Can you, let's just assume they can open up the bigger MLE. Is that like, that's not, I don't even know if that gets you Trae Jones. I don't know if you could poach him from San Antonio at that point. I mean, Ayo Dosunmu would be really interesting for this team. I don't know if he's floor general enough. Bulls aren't going to let him go for that. It feels like it'll be easier. Definitely thoughts on if you have any like floor general types for them. It'll definitely be easier for them to invest in size. And even that. So I'm going through some of the names that I feel like would make sense. And it's like, well, Bismack Biyombo is not actually that big. And do you want to go like Paul Reed's not that big? And do you want to go through the Andre Drummond experience again? Naz Reid would be a great offensive fit, but again, and his rim protection improved towards the end of this year. He's not that big.
No.
I kind of wonder, this is the name that's out there. And it doesn't, I think when you try to go through what they need, you're going to skew towards defense, but you have all these sort of wing types floating around and Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal. Would you trust? And if you can't get an advantage creator, would you trust if you could get him for like the bigger MLE, Christian Wood here, more shot creation, some actual size? Is that worth taking a chance on or just no?
I don't hate it at the full
That's
MLE.
The mark of I don't really like this. I don't hate it.
I mean, I feel like you're posing it as like, we understand what Christian Wood is at this point. How do you feel about this? So, I mean, that's if I'm spending the full mid-level, if they can get there, again, recognizing the need for size, especially defensive size, which Christian Wood really doesn't provide. I think I'd rather take a shot at like Gabe Vincent or someone like that. If you think Vincent is going to get the full MLE, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But that level of money, because none of the bigs. Yeah, I mean, you talk about the point guard market being pretty barren. The big market is rough.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, are we gonna like Alex Len? Like, I don't know what would be I wouldn't be opposed to them taking a Christian Wood flyer, but if you could get Gabe Vincent using your MLE, I would 100% use it on him rather than use it on. I'm just trying to like alternatives, and you could maybe it's easier for them to wind up trading for a big in the middle of the season. I don't know who becomes available. They could maybe even just look at filling him out with the minimum, or it's like, what does Dwight Powell actually cost you?
That
Or
was a name that just jumped out at me too. It's Dwight Powell. As a backup, I don't have any problem with Dwight Powell.
doesn't he have like a lifetime contract under the table with the Mavericks though? Like,
Probably an ownership stake.
Yeah, but I think the final question here to wrap up on them and keep us moving. You don't I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you expect them to continue down this path of we're not selling?
I mean, if it's true that they held on to Bridges in the face of like a 4 first-round pick offer, I have to believe that they will continue down the we are not selling path. I think the Nets can afford to operate kind of conservatively because they just went so wild for a few years with their whole roster building plan. That it rings pretty true to me, and I think they'll have the leeway to just kind of let's take our time a little bit with this.
I think I'm with you on that one, which will bring us to our next team, which is the New York Knicks. Their key free agents are only Josh Hart, has a $13 million player option. We all expect him to decline. Both Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin are extension eligible. Those negotiations, insofar as they happen, will be pretty interesting. Looking at like just a snapshot of their cap situation, they should be able to carry Josh Hart's hold and then use the bigger MLE. And that's assuming they decline Derrick Rose's team option. No notable trade exceptions for them. I have their biggest need as shooting that cracks the closing lineup, which is, we can get into that. I feel like that's fairly more complicated than people credit, or just they need a top 20 player. Like they need I don't want to say that Jalen Brunson is so good. I still firmly believe, I'll say they need another star, but I actually think that they need another best player. Mm-hmm. So what are you thinking about with this team as we head into their offseason?
I think that when I was trying to think of, well, what do they need? What can they get? I came back to like a bigger question that I want to get your take on. I'm curious what you think. So I'm going to answer your question with a question, I guess, basically. It feels to me like, yes, they need shooting that can close. Like that's clear. I just wonder if the roster construction, specifically having Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson's on a good deal. I'm wearing a shirt that apologizes to him. So we don't have there's no uncertainty about that. It feels like Randle and kind of to a lesser extent, RJ Barrett sort of make it really difficult to upgrade the team in the ways you'd want to upgrade it, especially on the shooting front. Because like, could you just like, again, this isn't going to happen. I'm just using him as an example because he's top of mind. Like if Cam Johnson were in the Randle spot, doesn't that just make more sense? Doesn't that work better, like roster construction wise? I feel like Randle being there makes it hard to build the type of lineup you want to close games. So is that like an oversimplification? Is that unfair? Is there another way you can get the shooter out there that you need and that you want to close games?
In theory, if Tibbs was willing to field a different kind of 5, which is to say, could you try closing with Randle at the 5? Would be something.
Yeah, which I don't love that.
No. So that's a great point to think about. And I kind of always framed it as, well, when you look at who's guaranteed to be in there, it's Julius Randle, a big, but Mitchell Robinson, let's say, and then Jalen Brunson. And as you technically have 2 spots, but you also have Josh Hart and Quickley and RJ Barrett and Quentin Grimes. And you need someone who very clearly is going to usurp those guys. But I'm with you in the sense that, yeah, he could, because if you're not going to play Randle at the 5, then the only thing you could do is, okay, well, we need a floor spacing rim protector at the 5. And there are like 3 to 5 of those in the league, legitimately. And we also know Tibbs doesn't necessarily like to play those types of guys, which limits you even further. That's why it's so tough, though, to get shooting that cracks. Because I do think that you could, we'll get into targets, but maybe you could swing a sign and trade for Gary Trent Jr. And that's great. I think he would be a good fit. I don't think he's going to he's not going to crack every closing lineup. And that's why I almost default to this team needs like that big time acquisition. It's not going to be anyone in free agency who does that for them, because I feel like, yes, they could get someone who will play and who can shoot, but will that player also be one of their top 5 guys? Probably not.
That's the central problem. Like, because even Gary Trent Jr. is kind of like a reach, right? In terms of like what you could afford to go sign.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. They're not, and it would have to be a sign and trade. Yeah.
Right. And he's not definitely going to be the better option than like Quickley or Barrett or even like Quentin Grimes night to night. Like some nights maybe, But like, that's not, you don't stretch and you do a bunch of crazy roster contortions to go get a guy that like kind of just fits into that lump of, well, this guy could close if he's running right and the matchups are favorable. Like, that's just, you just need to get the guy that 100% against anyone and everyone is in the closing lineup. And that's a trade. That's just like, that's a blockbuster trade. That's what that has to be.
When you're getting into actual free agency targets, does anyone stand out? Again, we're not predicting anyone would crack the closing lineup based on who's available and who they could afford, but any fits that you like?
Well, you've really swayed me with their need for a caps lock shooter, and Seth Curry, I think, is, he's fifth all time among guys with a lot of attempts from deep. He's falls into that same bucket of like, he's not definitely closing over quickly or whoever, so he's not a perfect fix. But if you're just addressing the shooting, he's the free agent that like jumps to mind. I like him more than someone like, other accurate guys like Ingles or Kevin Love or whatever. But like, Seth Curry doesn't move the needle. I don't think so. I'd be curious what you've got. If you've got a free agent, or certainly if you've got a trade, I would love to hear it.
Oh man, we can get into trades. You should be. Well, my free agent target would be Max Strus. I don't know is he going to get more than the MLE, and I don't think, I wouldn't predict him to close games over. So you have to close games over, let's say 3 of RJ Barrett, Quentin Grimes, Emmanuel Quickley, and Josh Hart. I don't know. It's not implausible that because he has size, he's not the biggest sieve on defense. And if his 3-pointer is going, that's hyper valuable.
Yeah.
But you kind of get into the one, I wouldn't guarantee it. And 2, $12 million a year or whatever it ends up being. Does he get more? Does he get less? Are the Heat less inclined to pay him because they have Duncan Robinson? I just don't know whether he's in MLE territory, or above it.
It's hard to say. I think the dimension he would bring, especially with his like movement shooting, would be really helpful for the Knicks, I think. But again, like, it's not like he's a career like 42% 3-point shooter. He's he has some rough nights, and we keep coming back to the same idea. He's not the guy. He's not the star as good or better than Brunson acquisition that I think you've been on them needing for like since before the Brunson deal, really. Like,
and what's so wild is when you go through trade targets, some of the ones that I think the caps lock stars that are most likely to become available, I don't know that you sit out those negotiations if they do become available, but they're no longer players that you're like, well, the Knicks need to get them. If it's Karl Anthony Towns, you can't have Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle on the same team. And so I guess you could be moving Julius Randle's part of that deal. The other thing I'll say is, even if they don't get a star, I would look at moving Randle. I don't think the Knicks are going to suck again if they don't trade Randle. I don't think it's mission critical. I do wonder if for them to be a contender, whether he can be a part of it. But if they don't move him, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think it's going to end up, and I'll phrase it this way. I would 100% trade Julius Randle, probably for less than the Knicks would. But I'm going to end the offseason. My level-headed approach will be, I'll look back and say, I wish they looked more thoroughly at moving Julius Randle than they did. I won't kill them for it, but I just don't think I guess if the right opportunity comes along, but I don't like saying selling humans. That's terrible. But I would trade Julius Randle for a package that maybe isn't as immediately focused, because I think that you'd be able to swing other moves or replace a lot of what he can do. Yeah. And so I don't think they're going to do that though. But the names like Trae Young, Dame Lillard, because Jalen Brunson's there, it's, yeah, okay, I guess you could trade Jalen Brunson for one of them, but are is it enough of an upgrade to justify, okay, we're going to consolidate on top of our best player? It's just a weird spot to be in. And it's just like, what other, Paul George for this roster would be great. There's been no inclination that he's available. Like, things could go off the wall in New Orleans with Zion Williamson. It's kind of like, okay, well, you have to look at it, but we just talked about how they need all this shooting. And like that's not going to be Zion Williamson. That's, of course, an extreme example. Are there any prospective available stars that, like, even if Pascal Siakam becomes available, is that someone who would intrigue you if you're New York? Like, are there any big names that you could see feasibly, like, not even super feasibly, but like within a long shot hitting the open market where it's okay, like, that's the guy the Knicks need to go after? Because everyone will say, oh, Devin Booker or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Those are guys that do not even fall in a million years bucket right now. And so that's what's so tough about this exercise.
No, I don't have any. I'm just trying to think, like, who's
Steph?
possibly trade
Um,
him. Well, I did have like the flash thought of like Klay Thompson. Maybe they're fine with paying him a ton of money for 1 year, but then what are the Knicks sending to the Warriors that would like? I just don't feel like he's going to be traded. Gosh, that's just I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I guess you just wait for Donovan Mitchell to inevitably sign there in a couple of years.
It's funny because you've almost made it harder on yourself by being this good or the way that your roster's set
Yeah.
up. Because you kind of need a very specific type of star now. I would argue they need to play like the 2-3 or the 4.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Yeah.
that's like what everyone's looking for.
Right. Real quick, I'm curious. Do you think either Quickly or Toppin get extensions? Because this isn't like they're not facing restricted free agency. Like, which is more likely to get it, and what numbers are you okay with?
Quickly, I think probably between like 15 and 20 is fine for Quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that too high? Would you go?
I think I'd be okay with that. I mean, he plays like a premium position as
the playoffs are concerning. His performance.
Yeah. Toppin though, I think is a tricky one because I'm not sure what his future is.
I would be, and I'm assuming you're in the same camp. I would be shocked if Toppin gets extended.
I don't know what would be in it for the Knicks to extend him. Like, I think he's still in him.
Because like I feel like he's repressing his value by staying in a place where he's never going to average like more than 17 or 18 minutes a game.
Yeah. Well, what does it take for him to say to accept an extension then? Not that the Knicks would offer it, but like if he gets offered $12 million a year, does he take it? Like, is he doing better than that in restricted free agency next summer?
Probably have to take it if you're him, right?
I don't know. I just threw the number out. It's somewhere in that range, I think. Because
I couldn't, I'm not going to roll the dice if I'm not going to take like mid-level money, but I don't know if 12, 13 million, if mid-level money's on the table, I don't know how you turn it down and bet on yourself when it's a team that you don't see a pathway, so long as Julius Randle's there, to your role expanding.
When the team won't bet on you, basically, won't give you the opportunity.
I will say, I don't think either of them are going to get extended because I think that the Knicks are going to want to keep their trade options open throughout the season. And it's going to get, I think Quickly will probably appeal to more teams, but it gets hard to move either one of them if they sign those extensions. Excuse me. Our next team, is this mine or yours?
I think I'll take it. I'll take it. You had the Knicks because you're the Knicks expert.
Thoroughly uninteresting, this team, because it's just there's a fundamental question until we know the answer. I don't really know what to talk about.
And it's the Sixers. They're key free agents. Maybe you've heard James Harden has a player option. Jalen McDaniels, Paul Reed will be restricted. Shake Milton, extension eligible. Tyrese Maxey. That's an interesting one.
Getting to Maxey. Sorry.
and that's like Harden affects kind of everything. Their cap situation is tricky too. If Harden doesn't get the max, they'll maybe have the mini mid-level. The full mid-level opens up if he leaves, most likely. So trade exception, they just have a small one from Matisse Thybulle. What's that?
That's bad if he leaves, right? You'd rather have James Harden than the full MLE, I'm assuming.
I don't know how many years am I going to have to pay him. It's hard to say. So yeah, this is like a one issue team right now. Nick Nurse is the new head coach. That doesn't really affect a ton. He was very non-committal, I think, when asked, do you want James Harden to be back? He eventually said yes, but it didn't seem like he was sure what was going to happen. I don't know that anybody is. So how about this? Let's start with this. If you're the Sixers, what are you comfortable paying James Harden? And is that going to be anywhere near enough to keep him from signing with Houston? And relatedly, is the Houston thing total bullshit and a leverage play, or is there some fire to the smoke?
There has to be fire to the smoke. I think that the ties to the city are a big deal. And the fact that Houston is not going to be circa, and maybe you like the Lakers' young core more at this point. They're not going to be, hey, let's bring LeBron in, see what we can do with this young core for part of the season. If you get James Harden, I guarantee you they're making just swings because they don't own their draft picks at that point. Like, so much of their future draft is traded away. They have all these other firsts that they can try and move around. So I think there's real smoke there. So I'll first say I predict him to stay in Philly. Would you agree with that? I ultimately think that's where this ends up.
I think probably both because of the money should be close, and because like if he really actually does, and as he said, care about winning a championship, like it doesn't square with leaving the Sixers, certainly for the Rockets. Those are kind of the two factors for me.
I would love for a dark horse suitor just to come out of left field.
But that's the thing. I don't think anybody wants to be in the paying James Harden $40+ million a year business.
Well, and so that's where, would you rather, so Ideally, I think it would end up at like 4 years and $140 million. So $35 million a year. Feels like it would be, I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to just inflate that number? Like, let's say to 40, would you give him the max if he was willing to sign for like 3 years, or like 45 million if it's so 3 years and 135? Or would you rather have the 4 years, 160, 4 years, 150?
I think I just want it to be a shorter deal. Like if it's close.
You're
So
like
I
the
think
1 year max, the one.
yeah, what can I right?
Option.
If you oh man, that if can we just do 1+1s indefinitely at the max? Like I think I'd feel more comfortable about that. I just it's so hard to know like what he's willing to accept. It's so hard to know what the Sixers it just every aspect of it. They got a new coach. You've got Daryl Morey there who just loves James Harden. If you said 3 years, what was your number? 3 years for like
35. So that, I mean, basically the max for 3 years for 130, let's say. So it's over 40 per.
I'd do that. I think if that's what it takes to keep him, I'd love to have like you'd never get it, but like a team option or an incentive, a heavily incentivized third year, or
Getting a
something
team
like that.
option or a partial guarantee, it's happening on the 4th year. It's
Right.
definitely not
That's the
happening on the
problem.
3rd year, I would think.
I mean, if you give me fine, if you want to call it a 4-year deal, James, but it's a team option on the 4th, we can do that. We could do that. That's fine.
What is your ideal average annual value? Is it like a lot lower? I'm talking about not even trying to be realistic, but is it, I wouldn't pay him more? Are you at, I wouldn't pay him more than 30 million a year or something?
Like fundamentally, what is he worth value wise? Basically, what do you make this year? Like 36. He opted out, and
yeah, he took to his credit that. By the way, that is part of the calculus here. That's like we didn't bring it up. That was a great point by you. So he's at 35.6 this past year. He accepted like $15 million less than he needed to, or whatever it was. And that's going to be part of the calculus.
There's a wink or a handshake involved in that. I don't care what the tampering investigation revealed. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a decent number. The like 30 mid 30s for because he was, he was a good offensive player this year. Like
sorry, he was at 33 this year. I'm looking at his player option. So that's where it was like 12 plus or 14 plus million less he accepted, whatever.
Yeah, that's a steal. I'm okay. And I think he's probably he's not worth the max. I don't think anything close to that. But if you're in the 30s, we're like, we could come to an agreement there.
I wonder if the new CBA has given teams cover in these situations where you would default to, well, this is the name. Look at what he's done. He's going to get the max. But now it's going to change how ownership and front offices view team building. And I think that this is a consequence where, I mostly think it's going to trickle down onto the mid-level or less NBA players, and they're going to get fucked. But could this be a situation where aging stars, they're not going to sign shorter term deals because once they get out of them, they're not guaranteed to get the full max as likely as they were previously?
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting angle. Maxi extension, we doing it?
Would you max him? That starts at like 36 million, I think, around 35.9.
I think you probably would have to get him to sign. Don't you think? I don't know that he's signing for less. I don't know if that doesn't answer your question.
If he was to get the 4-year max, you're looking at like 4 years and $160 million or whatever it is. I'll have to bring my max calculator up since I have it in there. But
well, I mean,
go ahead.
If I'm him, I'm saying, what did Jordan Poole get? 140. I mean, like 120 to 140. So we'll start there. That's the floor. Did I just flame out in the playoffs? Like, did I quit through the year basically?
Yeah. So it's 4 years and 160.2 million is his max. I think would you offer it, or is it just like, well, we're going to wait till restricted free agency then?
I don't know that he's worth that. Like, if you're just talking about value, he might
If Harden leaves,
I think you probably got to do it. Right. Like that settles it for you. But I think based on the market, like the Hero contract, the Simons contract, the Poole contract, those and Maxey, those are like the 4 guys we kind of weirdly lumped together. I think he just has to get more than all those guys. And so that doesn't leave you a lot of room short of the max based on what some of those guys got.
So you would expect him to get more than 30 million per?
I think so. And if Harden leaves, there's no cap on it. Like he's just getting
over. So if Harden stays, what are the biggest needs you're looking at for this roster? Are there any names and that's if he stays. I don't even know how to tackle their offseason. We're gonna be done in 30 seconds with this team because it's so confusing.
If he stays, what do we need here? I know you had Nick Batum as a potential trade target, like another, a bigger wing / forward type. I had DiVincenzo as a free agent target. I
You had
guess
another one that I really liked for this team.
you're gonna have to
Trey
remind me
Lyles.
because I never remember what I say.
Trey Lyles.
Oh yeah, Trey Lyles to get you just to give you a different dimension. Like I don't now I'm remembering what I said. Thank you for the prompt. Um I, I don't know how successfully you're gonna get away with Lyles at the 5 defensively. But I'd be willing to try it because he would give you some 5-out stuff if you really wanted to. That might make Maxey really scary with a totally empty floor. Just give you some different looks. I think I mean I don't know. I think he's probably much more than a minimum player. So like that makes it tricky. But I like the idea of a really like different look as a backup big, as Blown's pointing out.
Yeah, and I would love to see like a Bruce Brown type on this team, but they're
Oh
gonna
yeah.
unless Harden leaves, that's a no. So the two names I have kind of are in between like the big and the wing. Yuta Watanabe, like just get someone who's gonna drill corner threes, move him around defensively. And then he was injured for most of this season, but he's had a good run. Javonte Green can defend
Oh,
like pretty
interesting.
much almost every position at this point. You can use him as a backup big, you can use him as kind of wing player. Will he hit enough of his threes? That's certainly a question, but the threes you're going to generate in lineups if Harden's on the court and still playing the part of primary playmaker. If they make a bigger splash, though, it's happening on the trade market. I just don't know how they make, like, you have Tobias Harris's salary, but you just don't have a ton of pick equity here to move around. And so there's even like, I know people floated like, well, would you try to get like a Bradley Beal or something? It's just, I don't know. Can you get, and if you are, you're giving up Maxey as part of that. And so the fundamental question is, will James Harden be back? And I think he will be. That's where I'll land on the Sixers.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. You want to take us to the Raptors, our last team in the division?
Yeah, let's do it. So the Toronto Raptors, key free agents, Van Fleet and Gary Trent Jr. have player options, and then Jakob Poeltl. Extension eligible candidates, two interesting ones here to me. OG Anunoby, he's eligible for a 4-year, roughly $117 million max extension. Pascal Siakam is about 4 years and $181.1 million. Their cap situation is weird because we're factoring in all these free agents. I have them as a mini MLE team, but if you keep Poeltl, Van Vliet, and GTJ, depending on how much they get, you could run into some second apron awkwardness.
For
is
sure.
all I'll say there. And then no notable trade exceptions for them. Their biggest needs, my list was actually pretty long for this team: shooting, ball handling, advantage creation, and bench depth. That's
all.
I need a new head coach as of this recording, by the way.
Last team with that one.
So what are you thinking about with this team? I guess the place we have to start is do we start with the extension eligible guys first, or no, the free agents inform more of what they're doing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this will surprise no one who's heard me just, be incredibly conservative in my roster building kind of bent. Starting with Van Vliet and Trent Jr., I think if I'm Toronto, because the market sucks and like replacing these guys through free agency would be so difficult. I think I'd bring them both back, so long as we're not assuming there's just an absurd premium on, especially Van Vliet. You bring them back, you have your backcourt set, you can trade them later. Like, I just think preserving the asset kind of matters there, and there's just not good enough replacements. I think you're committed to bringing Poeltl back, so you're running it back. And I think the reason I'm sort of okay with that is you're going to have a new head coach, and I do think there's a distinct possibility that whether it was Nurse's fault, whether it was the roster's fault, whether it was whatever, like just a different mixture between coach and team could, whether you go positionless, whether you go conventional, I just think it's worth seeing what this personnel could do if coached by somebody different before you start like swapping out a bunch of parts and really doing things the complicated way. So I don't know what my numbers are for Van Vliet. I think anything over like 26, 27 a year feels a little iffy to me. And he's a little older too. So, and he's a small guard. They never age well. So if you go full, like 4 years, that gets scary. Trent is kind of more fungible. Like if you let somebody walk, it would probably be him.
It feels like he's the most likely of the three to leave, right?
Yeah, I think so. And weirdly, I guess I don't know what Poeltl's market would be, but I don't think there's a super hot market for Trent just because he's really kind of a pure 2. And like, that's kind of an out of favor position anymore, unless you're Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and you're just the best at being a pure 2. Yeah, I don't know. Do you feel differently about that? Like, because the alternative is you kind of just, you sign and trade, you let these guys walk, and you figure out what to do on the margins to replace them. That doesn't strike me as good an option.
No, I feel like they're more likely to do everything you said. And maybe something happens with Gary Trent Jr., sign and trade, or they let him walk. And his number is interesting. I don't know that he'll get a huge raise if he declines his player option, as we all assumed. Like, is there a team that's going to give him more than 18.8 million? Maybe it's just the same amount of money over longer years. But I think you run it back, and if you need to do something nuclear when looking at blowing it up, that's a decision you can make closer to the trade deadline, or maybe even next offseason when you're going to have another. Well, it's a natural pivot point, but it's maybe one you don't want to get to because OG Anunoby's an actual free agent. And I don't know if he signs his extension. Siakam, I think, like that's what makes, so their extensions, starting with Anunoby, 4 years and 117 million. I offer it. Do you think he would sign it?
I don't think it's enough. I think free agency is the route for him. Cause I mean, it's not way too low, but it's not.
If we're being honest, and I don't like saying this necessarily about players because it feels overly cruel, but to me, he's become one of the most overrated players in the NBA. And so that's a number I'd be comfortable paying him. I don't know how much higher I'd want to go. I just haven't seen the offensive development from him, enough of it anyway.
I think I agree with you insofar as the like offensive leap we were hoping for like 3 or 4 years running, I don't think is there. I think he's a premium role player. And as long as he thinks that, which there's some uncertainty about that. I don't know if he accepts that he's not like a guy that can and should do more offensively with the ball. If he's okay with that, I think a premium role player who can guard everywhere and can make spot up threes, like that's probably worth close to 30 a year, you know?
Maybe if there's better spacing, he does improve offensively. Maybe. Like they haven't necessarily surrounded him with pristine spacing.
Great point. Yeah, great point. No, so what about Siakam? I think we agree that that's not probably not quite enough for Anunoby to accept, and we'll go to free agency. Siakam is older, 181. That's a lot of money. I think that's closer to being acceptable, but I'm curious where you're at on that.
I'd take it if I were him. If they're going to give me the full 4-year boat on it, because like you said, he is older. And I'm curious how his game ages. And so I don't know if I'm Toronto if I'm offering it. It's just because then but with him going into free agency, I don't know that you want to risk it either, but you're shoehorning yourself into this very specific construct. So I think I would ultimately offer both these extensions. I think Siakam's more likely to accept it. I don't know if either of them accept it though.
Yeah. And I think if you're talking about, you were alluding to this a little bit, looking for like routes out of this roster, if you bring back VanVleet and Trent and it just like it looks the same, I think even certainly at both of these extension numbers, Anunoby in particular, I think Siakam and Anunoby would be movable for like at least neutral value. Certainly Anunoby probably for positive value. Siakam, I think if you traded him early in this deal, this hypothetical 4 for 181 that we have, I think he's probably getting you. Like you're not having to attach anything to get off that. I wouldn't think. So that's your way out if this doesn't work well. And again, it's probably better to have these guys at for Siakam, because we've agreed that Anunoby, if you bring him back at his extension number, you'd be totally comfortable with that. But for Siakam, like I think it's better to preserve the asset than to let him get to free agency, because then that just raises a whole new suite of like not great possibilities.
And there's probably the argument to me that, hey, Siakam is more valuable to you as a trade asset if he's on this longer deal than if you have to move him at the deadline and he's headed towards free agency.
For sure. Yeah. Then I don't know what you're getting for him. If you're trading him in like February of his expiring deal, that's not going to bring back nearly as much.
Any free agents, or even if you want to go trade targets, stand out to you as good fits for this team, given what they can spend?
Yeah, depending on what they do, I'll jump to the trade idea. Like if VanVleet's gone and you want to change it up, I think there's a pretty clear Anunoby as the principal for Anthony Simons and maybe a pick or Sharp or something. Like between Portland and Toronto, there's stuff you could get done. And since we're always talking about them in conjunction with each other, like is Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga enough to get Anunoby and somebody? Do the Raptors even want to do that? This all probably presumes that VanVleet is gone. You're not trading for another small offense first guard if he's still there, probably. But the free agent side of things is a little murkier for me because this roster is so weird and we don't know who's going to be on it. The trade possibilities are all over the place though for the Raptors.
Yeah, I'd be curious, like, if Malik Beasley's team option gets declined in LA. I'm wondering where that ends up. TJ Warren would be a good fit for this team. Max Strus, I don't know if they could get to the bigger MLE, so that would be tough, but he would have been would be a really good fit for them. They could be a Dario Saric team. I kind of thought
Yeah.
about. Do you like want another like kind of guy who could play the 4 or the 5 coming off the bench, and they just need bench depth in general? So those are kind of the names I have. They're just all their splashes are going to come by retaining their own. For Nas Reed would be a great fit too. They just can't afford him. I'm naming all these players they can't afford. You want to hear more Raptor free agents the Raptors can't afford, Grant? I've got a bunch of them. I think their splashes will come with retaining their own players, and if there's any real fireworks, it'll be on the trade market. They might be the most interesting team in this division though, leading into the offseason.
They certainly have like some of the most unsettled situation. Like no coach, don't know what your backcourt's going to be. Don't know if your 2 best forwards are going to be traded or extended. Like it's all over the place for them.
Do you want to take us out of here?
Sure. So that's your Atlantic Division preview and a lot of other interesting topics. Thank you everybody for listening, for commenting, for checking in with us. If you want to support us and follow us, go buy some merch. Dan and I are both sporting sweet merch. I couldn't find my coffee cup today, but I wore my apologies to Mitchell Robinson t-shirt. Dan's got a sticker on the mug. If you're not watching right now, you just have to accept my description of these things. Follow us on our socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and TikTok, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. Subscribe, like, rate, review. We love it if you do that on YouTube and Spotify, Apple, any place you get your podcasts. Tell your friends and enemies. Word of mouth still helps. And as always, I'll take us out with a shout out to, and he got mentioned this episode, the one and only Frank Ntilikina. And I will apologize to Mitchell Robinson because I have the t-shirt.